Welcome to World Revolution Channel. Today we present a summary of the book Fluke by Brian Klaas. Brian Klaas explores the phenomenon of chance, examining how seemingly random happenings and actions can profoundly shape our lives. Klaas skillfully interweaves different perspectives from physics, neuroscience, and philosophy to real-life stories to persuade readers that we live within a complex, interconnected system, rather than a predictable one driven by cause and effect. Let's find out more. So that sets the stage perfectly for the central thought experiment that really runs through this entire book, this whole deep dive.
Right.
If you could rewind your life, right back to the very, very beginning and just press play again.
Would everything turn out the same?
See, exactly. Would you be you? Would your life look anything like it does now? And the book Fluke argues very forcefully that the answer is just a resounding no.
An overwhelming no.
Yeah.
And it's because we are, I think, generally blind to these radically different worlds we just unknowingly leave behind.
Yeah, we think the big decisions are what matter, the job you take, who you marry.
But we completely ignore the tiny accidents that put us in the position to even make those choices in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this because there is a stunning, really powerful example of what he calls contingency, the power of these arbitrary decisions.
This is one of the best stories in the book.
It is. We have to go back almost a century to October 30th, 1926. A civilian, a man named Henry L. Stimson, and his wife get off a train in Kyoto, Japan.
Just a vacation.
Just a vacation, and they spend 6 days there, and they're just captivated. The gardens, the temples, the autumn colors, the crimson maples.
He forms this really deep personal, emotional attachment to the city.
He does, and that's the key. Now, fast forward nearly 2 decades, it's 1945.
A very different world.
A completely different world. And Stimson is now America's Secretary of War. He's the civilian with ultimate oversight of the atomic program.
Okay.
And the elite target committee, we're talking generals, scientists, the top brass, they have unanimously agreed on the first city to be destroyed by the atomic bomb.
And it's Kyoto.
It's Kyoto.
The city he loves.
The very same one. And their logic, from a military perspective, seems sound at the time.
Right. What was the thinking there?
Well, Kyoto was a massive city, an intellectual hub. It had Kyoto University, a center for Japan's elite.
And more importantly, wartime factories, I assume.
Crucially, yes. New factories making aircraft engines, essential war materials. The committee was convinced that leveling Kyoto would be the ultimate psychological blow.
So the military strategists were completely set on this.
Adamant. Kyoto must be destroyed.
But what's so fascinating here is how Stimson, the civilian, just intervenes personally, repeatedly.
He does. He completely overrides this unanimous, carefully considered military decision. He just puts his foot down.
He says it's not happening.
He says Kyoto will not be bombed without his explicit permission. He goes to President Truman, he lobbies him personally, and argues for its removal from the list.
And the military must have pushed back.
Oh, they did. They suggested other targets, but he kept pushing back on Kyoto. They said, okay, what about a secondary target? And he demanded it be removed entirely.
And his intervention saves the city.
Saves Kyoto. And the result, of course, is that the bombs are rerouted to Hiroshima and Nagasaki instead.
Killing roughly 220,000 people.
Yeah.
The book just hammers home the chilling contingency of this. The lives of hundreds of thousands of people balanced on a vacation choice.
A vacation choice made 2 decades earlier.
Stimson saved Kyoto because he had a soft spot for it, an emotional attachment. If he'd gone to Tokyo instead, or maybe never took that vacation at all,
history would be completely different. And this is the core definition of contingency, isn't it? This dependence of these huge, world-changing outcomes on things that seem totally trivial.
Absolutely. Seemingly arbitrary prior events.
We're so conditioned to look at the big forces, the geopolitics, the grand strategies, and yet this shows the quiet, immense power of just a personal choice. A vacation destination, changing the world, determining life or death for 250,000 people.
It just makes you realize how little of our path is actually set in stone by these, grand historical inevitabilities.
So little.
And this leads us right to this beautiful metaphor from the author Jorge Luis Borges.
The Garden of Forking Paths.
Exactly. Borges saw the universe as this huge, shifting labyrinth, a garden where the paths are constantly changing. Every choice you make, every step you take.
Opens some paths and closes off countless others.
Right. But the deeper thing that Fluke points out and connects to the Stimson story is that the paths available to us are themselves shaped by the unnoticed decisions of people we'll never meet.
These hidden Kyoto moments.
These hidden Kyoto moments are happening all around us all the time, defining the very shape of our existence. And we're blind to it because we want that clean story.
We want X causes Y.
Yes, and we want X to be a big, logical, important thing, not a tourist whim.
But if an arbitrary choice has that much power, what does that say about our own agency, our own control?
It forces us to admit that the world is really operating on two different scales. There's the scale we see, the big decisions, the obvious results.
And then there's the invisible one.
The invisible one. The tiny little shifts that just accumulate over time. The Stimson story is what happens when that second invisible reality crashes into the first one.
And we only ever see the world that did happen.
Exactly. We're completely blind to the millions of other worlds that didn't happen. Worlds that were closed off because someone, somewhere, decided to have a cup of tea or take a different route home from work.
We really have to shatter that comforting idea of a clockwork universe right now.
We do.
The conventional wisdom, especially in the West, is this idea of a radical individualism, that we're these separate atoms, totally in control of our own lives.
Independent agents.
But the reality, as the book shows, is it's profound interconnectedness, total unity. So let's get into chapter 2. Changing anything changes everything. This is where it gets really wild.
This is the story that really illustrates what he calls the delusion of individualism.
It's perfect. Okay, so we go to the summer of 2022, off the coast of Greece.
Okay.
A tourist named Ivan is out for a swim, gets caught in these really strong currents, and is just swept out to sea.
That's terrifying.
It is. After 18 hours fighting the waves, he's exhausted, he's freezing. The rescue teams have given up. They've presumed him dead.
But he's found.
Miraculously, he is found alive. And he's clinging to a small, brightly colored soccer ball that was just floating nearby.
No way.
He said he spotted it just as he was about to give up, to slip under the waves. He grabbed it, and it kept him afloat through the night until he was rescued.
Wow. That's already an incredible story of luck.
It is. But the connection that comes next is what's truly unbelievable. So Ivan's story hits the news. And a mother in a town called Thessaloniki, 80 miles away.
80 miles?
80 miles away. She recognizes the pattern on the ball.
You're kidding.
Her 2 young boys had been playing with that exact ball on a beach 10 days earlier. One of them accidentally kicked it into the agency.
And what did they do?
They just shrugged, watched it drift away, and went and bought a new one.
So an action they forgot about almost instantly.
Instantly. Now think about the physics of that. A soccer ball, kicked by a kid who couldn't have cared less, drifts for 10 days. 80 miles across currents, winds, tides.
And arrives in the exact right place at the exact right time for a drowning stranger to find it.
Their completely accidental, totally inconsequential action saved a man's life a week and a half later.
It's the ultimate example of how the noise in one person's life, and actions so trivial, becomes a life-saving signal for someone else.
Yeah.
The philosophical challenge here is huge. We call it luck. But Fluke argues that luck is just the name we give to these events when we can't trace that chain of contingency.
I can't see all the connections.
Right. In this deeply interconnected system, every little ripple, no matter how small, eventually touches another shore.
This just completely upends everything we thought we knew about predictability. Which brings us back to the Enlightenment and that search for certainty.
Right. Back to 1814. The French polymath Pierre-Simon Laplace.
Laplace. He was convinced by Newton's laws that the universe was this perfectly deterministic clockwork machine.
He believed that every single event, from a planet moving to a puff of air, is governed by rigid scientific laws. So if you had all the data...
All of it, down to every single atom, its position, its velocity.
You could perfectly predict the future, which led to his famous thought experiment, the Laplace's demon.
Right. The demon is this theoretical, all-knowing being.
It has omniscient intelligence. It knows every detail about every atom in the universe at one specific moment. And Laplace said for an intellect like that, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes.
So the demon would have known about the soccer ball's current and Ivan's swim, and that they were destined to meet.
In theory, yes. But the problem with that clockwork universe is that it needs perfect information.
And perfect information is exactly what we can never have.
It's impossible. And that idea was really shattered about 60 years ago by a meteorologist named Edward Norton Lorenz.
He was running a very basic computer simulation back in 1961, trying to predict weather patterns.
Right. And one day he wanted to rerun part of the simulation. But instead of starting from the beginning, he just typed in the data from an earlier printout. He figured, same conditions, same outcome.
Which makes sense.
It should. But the weather that came out of his second simulation was wildly, drastically different from the first.
And he couldn't figure out why at first.
No, but then he found the tiny culprit. It was in his data entry. The computer printouts were rounding the numbers to 3 decimal places.
So if the real wind speed was, say, 3.506127 miles per hour.
The printout just said 3.506. And that infinitesimal difference, a rounding error of 0.000127 miles per hour, was enough to create completely different weather systems a few weeks down the line.
Wow. And this accidental discovery, this gives birth to chaos theory.
And it introduces the world to the butterfly effect.
The idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can cause a tornado in Texas.
Exactly. And it proved that even if a deterministic clockwork universe exists in theory, we can never, ever understand it. The system is just too sensitive to the initial conditions.
If you can't measure those conditions with infinite precision, which you can't, your predictions will just spin off into total nonsense.
And the implication is just massive. It means long-term prediction is practically impossible. It's why weather forecasts are basically useless after about 10 days.
Beyond that point, the tiniest unmeasurable flutter has already compounded into a global effect.
And this isn't just uncertainty because we have bad data. It's irreducible uncertainty. It's baked into the very nature of the system.
So all our confidence in a perfectly predictable future is just hubris, wishful thinking.
Completely. I mean, think about a simple billiard table. Even there, the tiniest things, the gravitational pull from people standing nearby, tiny air currents, make it impossible to predict the path of the balls after 6 or 7 collisions.
And now imagine that scaled up to the trillions upon trillions of atomic billiard balls that make up our world. The economy, the climate.
It's pure chaos.
So if these small changes matter so much in weather and billiards, imagine what they meant for the origin of life itself. Let's talk about Chapter 3, because this is maybe the greatest fluke of all time.
The contingency we're talking about isn't just human history.
Yeah.
It's fundamental to our biology, to our very existence.
Right. For most of Earth's history, for about 2 billion years, life was just stuck.
It stalled out. It was all simple, single-cell organisms, prokaryotes, no nucleus, no complex parts.
And then about 2 billion years ago, a single accidental merger happened. A fluke.
A process called symbiogenesis. And the book calls it the greatest fluke because, as far as we know, it happened just once and never again since.
So what happened?
A simple bacterium somehow got engulfed by a larger prokaryotic cell. It bumped into it, went inside, but it wasn't digested.
It just stayed there.
It stayed there. And that bacterium eventually evolved into what we now call the mitochondria.
The powerhouse of the cell.
The powerhouse. It's what allows for the massive amounts of energy needed for complex things like nerves, muscles, brains.
So every single complex species, every tree, every mushroom, every human owes its entire existence to this one unrepeatable microbial accident.
If that bacterium had been digested, or if things had been just slightly different, life on Earth might still just be pond scum.
It's so unsettling that all of human history, all of our art and philosophy, our consciousness, it all goes back to a microscopic accident billions of years ago.
But the randomness doesn't stop there. This idea of developmental dark matter is fascinating. We see it in this creature called the marmor crab.
The marble crayfish.
Right. This species literally didn't exist until 1995. It came from a single female crayfish in a German pet shop that had a freak mutation.
She had 3 sets of chromosomes instead of 2.
Exactly, which allowed her to reproduce by cloning herself asexually. So every single marmor crab today is a genetically identical replica of that one original mother, a giant clone army.
And they've become this invasive species, especially in Madagascar. But here's the part that just destroys any idea of simple genetic determinism.
This is the critical experiment. Researchers took these genetically identical clones and put them in identical controlled environments.
Same food, same water temperature, same light cycle, everything the same.
And yet the offspring were bizarrely different.
Wildly divergent.
They showed this huge, unexplainable variation. One grew 20 times larger than its identical sister. Some were super aggressive, others were docile.
Their lifespans are totally different too, right?
Completely. One died after 437 days. Another, its perfect clone, in the same conditions, lived for twice as long. There's nothing in their genes or their environment that can explain it.
So what is it?
The book calls it developmental dark matter. It's just the tiny, seemingly random noise in development. Subtle biochemical fluctuations, tiny differences in neural wiring.
And those tiny differences get amplified over a lifetime.
Hugely amplified. And it really forces you to accept the core idea of Chapter 3, that everything doesn't happen for a reason.
As the biologist Darcy Thompson said, everything is what it is because it got that way.
Exactly. We are just the survivors of this long, chain-linked past of improbable, meaningless flukes. It's not all survival of the fittest. A lot of evolutionary change is just driven by neutral, random accidents.
It's so humbling. If any part of that chain had been different, if Stimson had gone to Bali, if the boys had gotten their ball back, if that bacterium had been digested...
We wouldn't be here, or we'd be something completely different.
Okay, so given this chaotic, contingent world where our actions have these unpredictable, massive effects, why are our brains so insistent on finding simple, linear explanations?
Right. Why do we fight against the complexity that science is showing us?
Chapter 4 really gets into the neurology of this. And if we connect it to the bigger picture, it's because our minds evolved for survival, for usefulness, not for objective truth.
It's the whole idea of the shortcut creature.
Explain that.
The basic principle is called the fitness beats truth theorem. Our brains evolved to be shortcut creatures, not truth creatures.
So fitness, as in survival and reproduction, is more important than seeing reality as it actually is.
Precisely. Objective reality is just overwhelming. It's an infinite flood of data. If we had to process all of it, we'd be paralyzed. So our minds evolved to perceive what you might call a useful illusion.
The book uses the computer desktop metaphor, which I love.
It's a perfect analogy. To write an email, you don't need to understand the binary code, the flow of electrons through silicon. That's the truth of the machine.
And it's completely indecipherable to most of us.
So we get a useful illusion. A desktop with little icons. You click the mail icon, you don't know how it works, but it does the job. Our perception of reality is that desktop.
It's a shortcut strategy that helps us get things done.
And that shortcut strategy always beats the truth strategy when it comes to survival. This filtering is even built into our physical brains. It's a process called synaptic pruning.
This is where the brain actually gets rid of connections.
Exactly. We're born with about 100 billion neurons, way more than we need. As we grow, the brain actively cuts away the unnecessary or redundant connections.
So we end up with fewer neurons, but the networks are stronger.
Much more efficient. We are literally built to discard most of reality just to be able to function.
And even the senses we use, the very window we look through, are completely arbitrary.
An evolutionary fluke. Take our vision. We're trichromats. We have 3 color cones, red, green, and blue.
Which lets us see millions of colors. But why 3? Most mammals, like your dog, are dichromats. They only have 2.
They're essentially red-green colorblind.
So why aren't we?
It's pure contingency. Millions of years ago, our primate ancestors lived in areas with lots of reddish figs growing against bright green leaves.
Huh.
The ones who evolved that third cone for seeing red against green could find food more efficiently. They survived. They passed on their genes.
Primates in other areas, without those figs, stayed red-green colorblind.
So the answer to this profound question, why do we see the world in the colors we do, is basically figs.
It's just another accident.
It proves our whole perception of reality is contingent on ancient arbitrary needs.
And yet our brain takes all this arbitrary data and is obsessed with finding patterns. It tries to connect the dots, even when there are no dots to connect.
That's the teleological trap. The teleological bias. We assume purpose and design everywhere. We can't stand randomness.
Which leads to another bias, the magnitude bias.
Right. The idea that big events must have big, important causes.
The Princess Diana example is perfect here.
It is. When she died in that car crash, conspiracy theories just exploded. Not because of evidence, but because people's minds couldn't accept that such a huge global event could be caused by something so mundane.
A drunk driver, a speeding car, a poorly designed tunnel.
A series of simple human errors and bad luck. The conspiracy, no matter how wild, was psychologically more satisfying because it provided a cause that felt proportional to the effect.
It's the Panglossian view, right?
Yeah.
That everything is perfectly optimized and happens for a reason. Our brains impose order on chaos to make it feel controllable.
That's our individual minds. But what happens when you put billions of these flawed, shortcut-seeking minds together.
You don't just get a big crowd, you get something much stranger. You get the human swarm.
Which is the focus of Chapter 5. And we can understand our modern world by looking at locusts.
Okay, locusts.
When locusts are in a low-density environment, they're chaotic. They move as individuals. But once they hit a specific tipping point, 73.7 locusts per square meter to be exact.
That's very precise.
It is. They undergo a phase transition, they stop being individuals, and form this astonishingly ordered superorganism, a swarm.
So out of individual chaos comes collective order.
Yes, but here's the paradox. The swarm itself, the macroorganism, is incredibly complex and unpredictable. It will suddenly change direction and migrate thousands of miles without any obvious cause.
And modern human society is like that swarm.
It's a perfect mirror. Our ancestors had local instability, famine, war, constant threats, but global stability. Life didn't change much from one generation to the next.
Today, we have the exact opposite.
We have immense local stability. Food is always in the store, your commute is predictable. But we live in this giant, high-density global swarm that is fundamentally fragile.
This is where the idea of self-organized criticality comes in, the sand pile metaphor.
Exactly. You add grains of sand to a pile, one by one. Nothing happens, and then one single, trivial grain of sand triggers a catastrophic avalanche that reshapes the whole pile.
The system is always waiting to collapse.
The book uses another great analogy, a paper bowl turned upside down, balanced on its sharp point. When we design our systems for hyper-efficiency, with no slack, we're balancing a marble on that sharp point.
We're in a state of criticality.
And in that state, the tiniest gust of wind, a single human breath, doesn't just make the marble wobble, it sends it flying off to a completely new, unpredictable location.
So our relentless drive for optimization and efficiency has actually made us more fragile.
Exponentially more fragile. We've removed all the slack, all the redundancy from our systems, making us incredibly vulnerable to these black swan events.
So if our world is balanced on that critical point, how would we even know a disaster is coming?
Well, scientists have recently discovered a kind of early warning system for this. It's called critical slowing down.
Critical slowing down.
When a complex system, like a financial market or ecosystem, becomes brittle, it loses its resilience. So if you give a little push, a minor shock,
It takes longer to get back to normal.
it takes longer and longer to snap back. That slowing down is a sign that a massive crisis, a phase transition, is about to happen. You see it in markets before a crash, in ecosystems before a collapse.
And the lead up to World War I is a perfect case study of this. A critical system and a tiny contingent trigger.
Absolutely. Europe before 1914 was that towering sand pile. It was a web of secret alliances, complex mobilization schedules. The whole system was so interlinked and brittle.
It was just waiting for that one grain of sand.
And the final trigger was a series of utterly absurd, tiny accidents, nothing proportional to the 20 million deaths that followed.
The first one was in 1913.
Yes. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is visiting Britain, and a servant loading guns for a pheasant shoot trips on a patch of ice.
And the gun goes off.
Both barrels discharge right near the Archduke. A slightly different angle, and he would have died right there, a year early.
And maybe the war is averted, but he survives.
He survives.
Yeah.
Which allows him to go to Sarajevo in 1914, where he survives the first assassination attempt. A bomb bounces off his car.
And his survival there leads to the contingent decision to go visit the wounded from that bombing in the hospital.
An unplanned detour, which leads to the final, fatal fluke. The motorcade takes a wrong turn, the driver realizes the mistake, puts the car in reverse, and stalls it.
6 feet away from Gavrilo Princip.
Who had given up and was just buying a sandwich. He looks up, sees his target sitting right in front of him, and fires 2 shots.
And the world explodes.
The size of the war was determined by that critical state of Europe. But the event itself was kicked off by a trip on the ice, a wrong turn, and a stalled car engine. We have to avoid that magnitude bias. It wasn't destiny. It was a fluke, acting on a fragile system.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture, it feels like the world is just fundamentally uncontrollable.
It is. It's a complex, chaotic system. The butterfly effect means we are in a constant state of flux, which brings us to Heraclitean uncertainty.
The idea from the Greek philosopher Heraclitus that you can never step in the same river twice.
Because the river is always moving. And everything we've talked about, chaos theory, criticality, it all just confirms this constant dynamic state of flux.
And this uncertainty isn't just about time, it's about space and geography. I want to talk about the lottery of Earth.
This is the idea of human space-time contingency. A geographical fact can exist for millions of years, but it only becomes important when it interacts with human civilization at a specific moment.
Like Saudi oil, it was there for 160 million years, but it was just black goo in the sand.
Until we invented the internal combustion engine, then suddenly it becomes the driver of global wealth and conflict.
There's an even more mind-bending example that links ancient geology to modern American politics.
We have to go back 100 million years to the Cretaceous period.
Okay.
A huge inland sea covered what is now the American Deep South. And for millions of years, trillions of microscopic plankton died, and their shells sank to the bottom.
Creating this thick layer of chalky, nutrient-rich soil.
Exactly. The sea eventually receded, leaving behind this incredibly fertile crescent of dark soil, which became known as the Black Belt.
And millions of years later, in the 17th, 18th centuries, that specific geological accident determined the absolute best place to grow cotton.
So when the cotton industry exploded, European colonists enslaved Africans and forced them to live and work precisely on that band of fertile soil that followed the coastline of an ancient sea.
The geology literally dictated the demographics of slavery.
It did. Now fast forward through the Civil War, Jim Crow, the Great Migration. Many African-American descendants of those enslaved people remained in that region.
The Black Belt.
And their voting patterns in those specific counties whose borders were drawn by 100-million-year-old plankton, are overwhelmingly Democratic.
And in the 2020 U.S. presidential election,
the final result hinged on incredibly narrow margins in states like Georgia. And the votes from those high-density Black Belt counties provided the crucial, razor-thin margin to flip the state.
So you're saying the election result was partly caused by phytoplankton that died during the age of the dinosaurs?
That is space-time contingency on a geological scale. It's awe-inspiring.
It is. And it also makes you realize the profound contingency of our own identity.
This is the non-identity problem. The precise timing of your conception. A difference of a single second.
And it's a different sperm meeting a different egg.
And a different person exists.
Yeah.
You would not exist. Someone else would be here, living a completely different life. Any tiny change of the past, and we vanish.
Which pushes us right up against the free will dilemma. Are our choices just the inevitable result of deterministic physics, a script written at the Big Bang?
Or are they just sheer quantum randomness, nature's dice roll? Either way, the traditional idea of an independent us making a free choice is seriously challenged.
So are we just along for the ride? Or does anything we do actually matter?
This is where the book delivers its most powerful paradox. It says, we have to shift our focus from control to influence.
Okay.
We can let go of the illusion of control that leads to what the book calls the solve for X slog of modern life. This endless, exhausting effort to optimize everything.
It's not that we're powerless.
No. The truth is, we control nothing, but we influence everything.
Our impact isn't in dictating the future, it's in starting a ripple.
Exactly. You start an unpredictable ripple effect that is, in its own way, boundless. One word, one small act of kindness, it's enough to change every constellation down the line.
So how do we actually live in a world like this? If we can't optimize, what do we do?
We have to shift our strategy from pure exploit to intelligent explore.
Exploit versus explore.
Exploiting is optimization. It's going to your favorite restaurant every week because you know it's good. Exploring is embracing uncertainty. It's trying a new place every time, even if some are bad.
In predictable systems, exploiting is better. But our world isn't predictable.
Our world is full of rice problems, not rubber problems. A rubber problem is deterministic. You plant a proven clone, you get a predictable result. But growing rice in fickle soil is an uncertain rice problem. Rigidly optimizing for it is a recipe for disaster.
This is why the Bantu people in Borneo developed that strategy for planting rice.
They follow omens from sacred birds. To an outsider, it sounds like pure superstition.
But it's not really about the birds.
No. The process of interpreting the omens is so complex that it's effectively random. It forces them to randomize their crops every year. Different plots, different times, different methods.
They avoid the temptation to just repeat what worked last year.
Exactly. So while their neighbors who optimize get wiped out by a single pest or a weird weather pattern, the Bantu survive because their random process forces them to diversify. They build slack into their system.
They're leveraging contingency instead of fighting it.
They understand that in a chaotic world, the only winning move is to prepare for the unexpected by exploring widely.
Which raises a really important final question then. Given that we are all creating these butterfly effects living in this fragile world, how do we use this knowledge?
How can we leverage the power of randomness, of slack, of cooperation to make the world slightly better? We need more redundancy, not relentless efficiency, more exploration, not just exploitation of what we already know.
We have seen how these tiny, arbitrary accidents, from ancient plankton to a servant tripping on ice, have shaped the entire world we live in. Maybe it's time to stop trying to tame all that complexity and just marvel at it.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Fluke. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, follow up in next topic.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to grapple with something that's really at the core of how we see the world. We're talking about how much of our lives, our history, even the structure of our reality is, well, purely accidental, contingent.
Unpredictable.
Yeah.
We're diving deep into a really remarkable synthesis of material here. It's drawn from, biology, physics, history, social science, and all of it taken together argues that the tidy, logical cause and effect picture we have of the world, it's largely a comforting illusion.
Exactly. We're exploring the central role of chance, of chaos, and what the material calls a radical interconnectedness. We're talking about flukes, those small contingent events that shape absolutely everything, but that we're usually completely blind to.
Right.
Our goal today is to pull these arguments together and show you why, even if you feel like a tiny cog in some giant machine, every single action you take creates these profound, measurable ripples. And we think if you listen closely, you'll feel this profound truth that you need to. And we love this phrase, you need to come back to continue FLUK.
That phrase really does capture it. The central idea we're trying to dismantle is what our source calls the storybook version of reality.
The storybook version.
Yeah. Humans are just hardwired to prefer explanations where big events have big, rational, direct causes. We crave order. We need certainty.
And that need for a neat story, where X always causes Y, it just blinds us to how messy and complicated and, frankly, uncertain the world really is.
It absolutely does. And it also, I think, challenges this idea of the delusion of individualism.
Okay. Explain that.
Well, we tend to see ourselves as these isolated self-governing units, completely independent of the countless people who came before us.
Right, the self-made man myth, sort of.
Precisely. But when you actually trace back your own existence, you realize it is just an astronomical series of narrow escapes and incredibly precise contingent steps.
It really is mind-boggling when you think about it.
It is. I mean, think about the sheer luck required for your exact genetic combination to be here, listening to this. We're talking about some Ice Age ancestor not zigging when they should have zagged from a saber-toothed tiger.
Or a specific ship making it across the Atlantic in a storm.
Or even on a biological scale, some tiny worm-like creature hundreds of millions of years ago not getting squished under a rock. If any of those precise things hadn't happened, sure, other people would exist.
But not you.
But not you, exactly.
Yeah.
That person listening right now would not be here.
And that interconnectedness is not just in the past, right? It extends right up to this very moment. So let's lay out the roadmap for this deep dive. We're going to start by unpacking how our minds are built to simplify all this complexity. That's Chapter 7. Then we'll zoom out to how the physical Earth itself dictates our destiny in Chapter 8.
And after that, we get into the shocking influence of single individuals on history, which is Chapters 9 and 10.
Then we have to tackle why our math, our equations, our models so often mislead us. That's Chapter 11.
And finally, we have to go there. We're going to grapple with the huge philosophical questions. Free will, determinism, and what it all means for how we should live. That's Chapters 12 and 13.
Okay, let's do it. Let's start with the brain. So, Chapter 7. The first big hurdle to seeing the world as it really is, chaotic, contingent, is us. We are fundamentally storytelling animals.
Yes. Our psychological need for a narrative, for order, it's so incredibly powerful that it literally acts as a filter. It actively blinds us to the chaos.
It's almost ironic because that need for a story is an evolutionary advantage, right?
It is, absolutely. Our minds evolved what the material calls the shortcut creature strategy.
The shortcut creature, I like that.
It's perfect, isn't it? We process information in a stripped-down, super simplified form just to make sense of a hostile, complex world and, survive. We're built to focus only on helpful patterns, on abnormalities.
And we discard everything else.
We discard everything that seems like noise.
Yeah.
And there's the problem. We automatically disregard the flukes, the contingent events, as irrelevant noise.
But here's the twist. Sometimes that shared generational story is the key. It's the most important signal.
Right. And there's an incredible anecdote for this. The Moken people. They're ocean nomads in the Andaman Islands.
And in 2004, the massive Indian Ocean tsunami hit. Hundreds of thousands of people died. But the Moken, they were almost untouched.
Almost no casualties at all. They survived because they recognized an alarm signal that was, frankly, invisible to everyone else.
Yeah.
The tourists on the beaches, they saw the water recede and were curious.
But the Moken knew.
They knew. The alarm for them was the sudden dead silence of the cicadas in that receding sea. They didn't need scientific instruments or data. They recognized it because of a shared generational story about Laboon,
Which means?
the wave that eats people.
Wow, so the story wasn't just folklore, it was a behavioral protocol.
Exactly. It was a calibrated protocol passed down through time. It drove immediate life-saving action. And it completely contradicts our modern view that only objective, data-driven reality matters. For the Moken, the narrative was the data.
And this narrative bias, it goes so deep. Look at the stories we create, even fiction. We demand that they conform to these simple, predictable shapes.
Mm-hmm. The writer Kurt Vonnegut famously graphed them.
Right. Man in the hole, the hero gets in trouble, they work their way out. Or bad to worse, which is just a slow, inevitable decline.
Or the classic Cinderella arc. Up, down, and then way up.
What's so wild is we don't just prefer these shapes, we actively impose them on reality.
Yes, reality doesn't have a narrative arc. There are no chapter breaks. There's no rising action. But our brains just compulsively cram events into these forms.
And that gives us this false impression that the world is meaningful and predictable, and that it's never just random.
We even demand moral consistency. There are studies showing a direct link between high TV ratings and stories that have, narrative moral justice.
The good guys win, the bad guys get punished.
Exactly. We want the world to be just, and we find satisfaction when our stories confirm that, even though reality, well, it doesn't operate with a moral compass.
And we absolutely reject randomness in our stories. This is what the material calls the banana peel test.
I love this test.
It's so simple and powerful. Imagine the entire Harry Potter epic, 7 books, building to this huge climax. And then Voldemort is defeated because he slips on a banana peel and breaks his neck.
We'd riot. We would hate that ending.
We'd feel cheated. We reject randomness as a legitimate conclusion, even though, in the real world, a misplaced briefcase or a sudden cough can completely change geopolitical history.
And that narrative drive, that need for a story, leads directly to some really significant cognitive errors. The main one is called teleological bias.
Okay, what is that exactly?
It's the innate universal mistake of slapping ordered reasons and purpose onto disordered random processes. It's the idea that everything exists for a reason, usually a human-centered one.
And it's amazing how pervasive this is. The research shows that kids from all over the world, whether they grew up in the Chinese countryside or downtown Manhattan, they will intuitively believe that mountains were created specifically for humans to climb them.
Exactly. They assume inherent purpose, where there's only, geology and chance.
And when that bias goes to its absolute extreme, you get
the Panglossian worldview.
From Voltaire's Candide.
Right. Dr. Pangloss, who insisted that everything that happens is for the best, that everything is perfectly designed for its function. Legs were made for breeches. Noses were made to hold up spectacles.
It's this worldview that insists the world is always marching toward progress, toward some fixed, happy ending.
And that kind of optimism, while comforting, it leads directly to another error that really fuels a lot of misinformation today. Magnitude bias.
Magnitude bias. Big events must have big causes.
Precisely. This is the fertile ground where conspiracy theories grow. People just cannot tolerate the idea that a huge, momentous event, like the death of Princess Diana, could be the result of something as mundane as human error, bad luck, or just driving too fast.
The consequence feels too enormous for the cause to be that trivial.
So instead of accepting that unsatisfying, messy truth that it was an accident, conspiracists generate these complex, often contradictory narratives about secret plots and hidden patterns.
And what's truly wild is they're willing to accept 2 or 3 mutually exclusive explanations as long as they can avoid the most unsettling truth of all.
Which is?
That an accident, a random tweak in the system, caused the massive outcome. The absence of a good story is worse than a bad one.
That's it. At the end of the day, our brains will prioritize comfort and narrative cohesion over the empirical truth. We want the neat, tidy box, even when we know deep down reality is just a maddeningly complex mess.
So, if our own minds are filtering reality this way, how much of our destiny is just dictated by things completely outside of us, like literally the ground beneath our feet?
Well, that sets up our next section perfectly. We're moving from the internal biases to the external unchangeable forces. So we often think about chance in terms of time, right? Being in the right place at the right moment. But one of the biggest, most static forces of chance is just geography. And to really get this, we have to think about space-time in a much broader sense than just physics.
Okay, so not Einstein's relativity. What does space-time mean here?
It just means that where and when something happens matters just as much, if not more, than what is happening. When we talk about the lottery of Earth, we're talking about the arbitrary, fixed characteristics of the physical environment that just profoundly shape everything that comes after.
So things like Britain being an island or a mountain range blocking communication routes.
Exactly. Or whether a region has a major inland waterway. These facts are static, they don't change, but they determine our social and economic paths.
And these seemingly random details often become the forgotten factors in huge historical moments.
Oh, absolutely. Look no further than the Pine Tree Riot of 1772. This is a genuinely forgotten catalyst for the American Revolutionary War.
A pine tree riot, that sounds almost too trivial to be a real thing.
It sounds it, but it was a perfect example of arbitrary environment meeting a specific human need. The forests in colonial America had these massive cloud-kissing white pine trees.
And the British Crown wanted them.
Desperately. For mass for the Royal Navy. This was crucial for projecting global power. So the Crown declared the best of these pines were reserved for the king's use and marked them with the broad arrow, a stamp they'd hammer into the trunk.
So this wasn't just some bureaucratic rule, it was a huge economic intervention.
A huge deal. And when a royal surveyor caught some mill owners processing wood that still had that broad arrow on it, he arrested them and fined them. The response from the people of Ware, New Hampshire was immediate and violent.
What happened?
A mob descended on the Pine Tree Tavern, cornered the king's guy, seized him, stripped him, and gave him an old-fashioned whipping, one lash for every tree he had tried to reclaim for the crown.
Wow.
The riot was so fierce that the king's officials decided to go easy on the punishment. They were worried a heavier hand would spark a full-on uprising.
And that perceived weakness, that successful defiance, it emboldened the colonists just a few years before the Boston Tea Party.
Exactly. The founding of the United States was, in part, determined by arbitrary geography, the presence of specific tall trees, a factor that is completely left out of our simplified story of taxation without representation.
And that is how physical reality creates what the material calls geographical path dependency.
Yes, past human decisions, interacting with the unchangeable environment, constrain future decisions. It creates these trajectories that become almost impossible to reverse.
The classic example of path dependency is always the width of railway tracks, right? Some arbitrary choice made ages ago locks in the entire future of transportation.
Right, but when you combine it with geography, it's even more powerful. I mean, think about living in an ancient city like Winchester in England. You might think you're walking on a modern road, but the path you're on today is often determined by Iron Age settlers thousands of years ago who chose a defensible hill to build on. The Romans, the Anglo-Saxons, the Normans, they just followed the easiest path that the geology first provided.
So arbitrary geology sets the first direction, and then human decisions just reinforce it over and over.
Locking the future into the past.
But the geography only becomes fate when it interacts with us at the right time. This brings us to human space-time contingency.
Exactly. A geographical fact can be inert for millions of years and then suddenly become a driver of massive change because we develop a technology that can exploit it.
The prime example has to be oil.
Petroleum. It lay dormant under what is now Saudi Arabia for 160 million years. A geographical fact of zero consequence. It meant absolutely nothing.
Until
the late 19th and early 20th century with the invention of the internal combustion engine and this new global need for fuel.
And the contrast is just staggering. In 1938, when they discovered oil in Saudi Arabia, transportation was still primarily by camel.
And then, within a few decades, a blink of an eye in historical terms, that contingent interaction of static geology and human technology transformed Saudi Arabia from one of the poorest nations on Earth to one of the richest. The when and the what mattered as much as the where.
Now, we have to be careful with this idea because geographical explanations have a pretty dark history.
They do. Ancient Chinese, Greek, Arabic scholars. They often linked climate or geography to moral or racial characteristics. It led to geographic determinism becoming, an academic insult for a long time.
And rightly so. It was used to justify all sorts of ugly ideas about cultural superiority.
But the modern reevaluation, maybe most famously from Jared Diamond in Guns, Germs, and Steel, argues something different. It argues that the profound inequalities across civilizations don't stem from some inherent racial superiority, but from pure geographical endowments.
Like his continental axis theory.
Right. The east-west orientation of Eurasia allowed ideas, crops, and animals to spread easily across similar climates. That conferred huge advantages that the north-south axis of Africa, with its climate barriers, just didn't have. He's arguing for environmental influence, not superiority.
Which brings us to the most incredible, almost unbelievable modern example of this. A direct line from an ancient inland sea during the age of velociraptors to the razor-thin outcome of the 2020 U.S. presidential election.
It sounds like science fiction, but it is pure geology. During the Cretaceous period, 100 million years ago, give or take, a vast inland sea covered much of the U.S. Deep South.
Okay.
And when microscopic phytoplankton in that sea died and sank, they formed these thick layers of nutrient-rich chalk rock.
And when the sea receded?
That chalk became this dark, incredibly fertile soil, a region we know today as the Black Belt.
And that specific soil was perfect for cotton.
Perfect for it. So when European colonizers established the system of chattel slavery, they forced enslaved Africans to live and toil precisely on this crescent-shaped Black Belt soil. It aligned the demographics perfectly with that ancient coastline.
And that demographic alignment has been functionally fixed for over 150 years.
Even today, the descendants of those enslaved people overwhelmingly live and vote in those same counties. If you look at a county-level map of the 2020 election results in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, you can literally trace the path of that ancient sea.
It's stunning. Because African Americans overwhelmingly support Democratic candidates, that geographical concentration of voters provided the critical, narrow margin that allowed Joe Biden to win Georgia.
And that win, in turn, shifted control of the U.S. Senate, which had a profound impact on his administration's entire agenda.
So a coastline from the age of dinosaurs determined who controlled the modern U.S. Senate.
That is the depth of geographical path dependency. It is a definition of a historical fluke.
Okay, so we've gone from the biases in our minds to the constraints of the Earth. The next logical step is to zoom in even further.
Right. What happens when the idiosyncratic contingent actions of a single person introduce chaos into these massive systems? The modern world, with its standardization and metrics, it often makes people feel like interchangeable cogs.
Yeah, that's a common feeling.
But the philosophical implication of chaos theory is the radical opposite of that. It suggests that the idiosyncratic, the arbitrary behavior of a single person can absolutely reroute history. It matters that it's you, and not some statistically equivalent replacement, who is acting.
The mathematician David Ruel had a great thought experiment for this, right? The flea experiment.
The flea thought experiment. It's brilliant. If you try to model the future movement of one flea on a checkerboard, it's pretty simple physics. But what happens when you introduce 64 fleas?
Okay.
And then you learn that one flea, let's call him Nigel, is a cannibal, and another flea, Barbara, has a phobia of cannibal fleas and will leap off the board if Nigel gets too close.
The model instantly collapses.
Instantly. The individual differences, Nigel's cannibalism, Barbara's phobia, they're not interchangeable. When individuals have these non-standard, quirky traits, the initial conditions matter enormously, and prediction just fails. Your personal quirks, the things that make you you, are the drivers of complexity.
And this isn't just a theory. We have seen history pivot on exactly these kinds of quirks. The American Civil War was nearly lost by the Union, which would have permanently changed the world, until one single contingent fluke.
The Lost Orders at the Battle of Antietam in 1862.
The stakes were so high at that moment.
Couldn't have been higher. The Confederacy was winning. Britain was on the verge of officially recognizing the South. A Union loss there could have been the end. And then an act of, laziness, simple fatigue. A Union corporal just resting by a fence found 3 discarded cigars wrapped in a piece of paper.
And that paper was General Robert E. Lee's exact battle plan, Special Order 191. But here's where the deeper fluke, the human idiosyncrasy, comes in. That paper is useless if you can't be sure it's real.
Right. It could be a trap, a decoy. The orders were handed up the chain of command and authenticated by a Colonel Samuel Pittman. And why Pittman?
Because before the war, he was a bank teller in Detroit.
A bank teller. And he recognized the signature of the Confederate paymaster, R.H. Chilton, because he had seen it thousands of times on checks that crossed his desk.
Just stop and think about that. Modern history pivoted on 3 cigars, a patch of shade, and the sheer happenstance of a former bank teller being the one specific person in the right place at the right time with the exact memory needed to validate that intelligence.
Without that validation, the orders might have been dismissed, the Union could have been crushed, and the United States as we know it might not exist.
It really highlights that the message itself is so often contingent on the messenger.
Yes. This is the ancient lesson from the Greek myth of Cassandra. She could perfectly see the future, but Apollo cursed her so that no one would ever believe her. The truth was useless because she lacked credibility.
We see that play out so tragically with Abraham Lincoln. He received accurate warnings about danger at Ford's Theater from his wife's spiritualist, a man named Charles Colchester. Lincoln ignored it, called it drivel.
Because Colchester was a known charlatan. He held seances. He was not a credible messenger.
But the irony is just profound. Colchester wasn't getting his information from the spirit world. He was a close friend and confidant of John Wilkes Booth.
So the warning was based on genuine inside information. But the messenger's reputation, the wrong signal, caused that warning to be fatally dismissed.
And what about Charles Darwin and the shape of his nose?
It's another incredible example. He was almost rejected from the foundational voyage of the HMS Beagle by its captain, Fitzroy.
Why?
Fitzroy believed in physiognomy judging character by physical features, and he didn't think Darwin's nose suggested he had enough energy and determination for a long voyage.
Unbelievable. Had he been rejected?
Then the theory of evolution might have been introduced solely by Alfred Russel Wallace. Wallace had the core theory right, but he was also deeply involved in phrenology, hypnotism, seances. He believed he could materialize flowers out of thin air.
So the exact same scientific message coming from Wallace would have been laughed out of town.
It would have been ridiculed, dismissed because of the unseemly signal of the messenger. It took Darwin, the highly credible, skeptical naturalist, to deliver that revolutionary idea and have it be taken seriously. The contingency is breathtaking.
So let's tie these individual flukes to the arbitrary systems we live by. Chapter 10, of clocks and calendars. How much of our daily schedule is just pure historical accident?
So much of it. There's this incredibly moving story of Joe Lott and the 9/11 tie. He survived the attack because of this chain of seemingly trivial, unrelated events.
His flight was delayed.
Delayed 14 hours by storms. He arrived exhausted, but realized his white shirt was wrinkled. So he went back to his hotel room to iron it. It took him maybe 15 minutes.
And it was during those precise 15 minutes spent fussing over a wrinkle that the first plane struck the tower.
And the irony goes even deeper. The tie he was wearing was a gift from his friend, Elaine Greenberg, who tragically died in the attack. She bought it for him after he discovered a love for impressionist painting on a trip. Every single one of those contingent details had to line up perfectly for him to be 15 minutes late.
And yet, our whole system for organizing that time is itself an arbitrary fluke.
It's a prime example of historical accident becoming fixed fate. Our 7-day week is based entirely on the Romans observing the 5 visible planets, plus the sun and the moon.
If they had telescopes, we could have a 9-day week.
We could. Imagine the shift in global labor markets. And our months, September, October, November, December, are named for the numbers 7, 8, 9, and 10. It's a leftover from an older 304-day Roman calendar.
And these arbitrary decisions from millennia ago still dictate global pay schedules. This is what you call lock-in.
Exactly. Where contingent, sometimes silly, events become permanent fixtures. The most painful example for anyone learning English is our spelling. Why do so and knew not rhyme, but colonel and colonel do?
It's a fluke of lock-in. A major shift in English pronunciation happened, but it happened before the printing press standardized the spellings, so the printer froze the inconsistency forever.
The same thing happened with our pets. We have 27 distinct types of terriers today, compared to maybe 2 in 1840. Why? Because their forms were locked in by the arbitrary, eccentric preferences of rich, bored, Victorian doggy people.
And specific events, like the Great Collie Ear Trial,
which literally determined whether a collie's ear should be pricked, tipped, or floppy. Those arbitrary aesthetic choices define the genetics of almost all collies born today. Contingent lock-in is everywhere.
And all of these flukes, they just underscore how little we actually know and how little we can predict, which brings us to the limits of our own science and math. Okay, so we live in a world that is obsessed with data, with metrics, with quantitative prediction. We trust that math can impose order on all this chaos.
But Chapter 11 delivers a really powerful critique of that overconfidence, especially when we're dealing with these contingent open systems.
And the foundation for the skepticism is the massive replication crisis in social science. For years, we've relied on these studies that claim to explain fundamental human behavior.
Only to find out they don't hold up. The findings just can't be repeated when other researchers try to verify them.
The most sensational example has to be the 2011 Daryl Bem study. He published research in a top journal suggesting participants could feel the future.
Right. They could anticipate sexy images better than non-sexy ones.
Which sounds ridiculous on its face. But the really insidious problem wasn't just the finding itself, it was the institutional failure. When another group of researchers tried to publish their failed replication showing the effect didn't exist, the second reviewer who rejected their paper was Daryl Bem himself.
That's a huge systemic problem.
A profound one. And the scope of this failure is just staggering. A 2015 study tried to replicate 100 influential psychology experiments. Only 36 of them passed. That's a failing grade.
A dismal one. Other researchers showed you could publish statistically valid but obviously bogus results, like listening to the Beatles song When I'm 64 made people physically younger. It exposes deep flaws in our statistical methods.
And this is compounded by what's called the file drawer problem.
Right. Imagine 20 researchers are all testing the same hypothesis. 19 of them find no statistically significant result. So what do? They stick their findings in a file drawer because negative results rarely get published.
But the 20th researcher, purely by random chance, finds a statistically significant discovery.
And that's the only one that gets published.
Yeah.
So the scientific community and the public is led to believe the effect is real. The whole process systematically skews our perception of reality, making the world seem far more orderly and predictable than it actually is.
This all forces us to make a really critical distinction, one that was first formalized by the economist Frank Knight.
Yes. The Knight's dichotomy, risk versus uncertainty. We have to separate what we can know and quantify from what we simply cannot.
Let's define those. Risk is what the material calls tameable chance.
Tameable chance. It applies to simple, closed systems where the outcomes are well-defined, the process doesn't change halfway through, and you have tons of historical data. A coin flip. An insurance company's actuarial tables. Probabilities work perfectly there.
But radical uncertainty is untamable chaos.
Untamable chaos. This applies to non-stationary, contingent, unique problems with unknown unknowns, predicting the next global financial crisis, or designing a mission like the Bin Laden raid. In these systems, probabilities are just a mismatched tool.
The Bin Laden raid is the perfect case study. President Obama's advisors gave him estimates like, there's a 70% chance he's there.
But what does that 70% even mean? It wasn't a repeatable probability. You can't run the raid 100 times and see how often he shows up.
It's just an expression of confidence.
Exactly. It's a belief, cloaked in the language of math to provide comfort. And the outcome was contingent. A helicopter malfunction, a dog barking, and it was non-stationary. Pakistan's political reaction could change hour by hour. Radical uncertainty was in complete control.
And yet, we continue to chase the comfort of numbers. This is the tyranny of quantification, or what the economist Paul Romer called mathiness.
Mathiness. It's the use of complex formulas not to illuminate reality, but to obscure fundamentally flawed assumptions.
We've become so mathematized that we prioritize the complexity of the equation over whether the inputs are any good in the first place.
Garbage in, garbage out. And this pursuit of mathematical neatness is precisely where we actively delete the flukes.
We call them the error term.
Right. Researchers clean the data, they find the outliers, the things that don't fit the neat pattern, and they just delete them.
And in a complex system, that's madness.
It's absolute madness. In systems defined by self-organized criticality like human crowds or stock markets, the outliers are often the most important data points. They're the catastrophic failure modes.
It's like judging the Titanic's maiden voyage a success, because 99.8% of the journey went smoothly.
And you just ignore that 0.2% error term called the iceberg. By deleting the noise, you enforce this worldview where the major catastrophic contingent fluke is just ignored.
So if even our most complex math can't predict the future, and we're just physical creatures bound by geology and chance, it raises the biggest question of all.
Are we even free to choose? And so we arrive at the deepest philosophical challenge, the one that sort of underpins everything we've talked about, is to come back to that foundational question.
If you could rewind your life to the very beginning and then press play, would everything turn out the same?
Exactly. And the sources identify about 6 major answers to this, ranging from, libertarian free will, I could have done otherwise, all the way to theological determinism, God decides everything.
But the view that really grounds this whole exploration of flukes and chaos is the deterministic universe answer.
Right. Determinism argues that everything that happens is directly and completely caused by what came before it. It's an unbroken, fixed chain of cause and effect, unfolding according to the laws of physics.
So if you knew the exact location and momentum of every particle at the Big Bang,
You could, in theory, predict every single future event, including this conversation and every thought the listener is having right now.
the primary challenge to free will then comes from the physics problem. The idea of an independent agent choosing actions runs right up against the physical reality of the mind.
Your thoughts, your memories, your intentions, your will. They are not ethereal concepts. They are emergent properties of physical matter. Neurons firing, chemicals interacting in your brain.
And the composition of that matter is dictated by our genes, our experiences, even the bacteria in our gut.
So if our decisions come entirely from physical matter, and physical matter obeys the immutable laws of physics, where is that moment of independent, uncaused choice?
To really believe in that kind of free will, you basically have to believe in what philosophers call the ghost in the machine heresy.
You do. You have to believe that human brain matter has some unique, magical property that allows it to just suspend the fundamental laws of physics that govern every other particle in the universe, which violates everything we know about reality.
Now, some people try to rescue freedom by pointing to the randomness of quantum mechanics.
The quantum flukes answer. The world is indeterministic at the subatomic level, so maybe our choices are random too.
But that's a fallacy, isn't it?
A deep one. Behavior that's dictated by nature's random number generator is not freedom. If your life is just driven by the throw of quantum dice, you're not a free agent. You're just unpredictable. Freedom requires intent, control.
So this philosophical trap leads us to the most emotionally difficult position of all, the compatibilist solution.
It's the pragmatic acceptance of determinism. If determinism is true, then strictly speaking, it's nonsensical to morally praise Einstein for his genius or condemn a psychopath with a damaged amygdala.
Because they truly couldn't have done otherwise. Their outcomes were fixed.
But the compatibilist argues we should still celebrate heroes and punish criminals and hold people accountable because it has massive pragmatic value for society.
So we don't lock someone up because they chose evil. We lock them up because they're dangerous, the same way we'd build a seawall to contain a hurricane.
Exactly. It shifts the justification from some metaphysical freedom to just pragmatic societal function. It's a useful lie we agree to tell ourselves.
And that's a tough pill to swallow. And it speaks directly to this paradox of control in the modern malaise. We live in the most advanced civilization ever, yet we see these surging rates of alienation and despair.
It's tied directly to this obsession with control, with efficiency, with demanding certainty in a world that's fundamentally defined by flukes. We've created this culture of hyper-productivity.
Where life becomes a solve for X slog. Every action is for something else, a goal, a metric, a promotion.
And it strips away the joy and reverence for just existing.
For being. But the material offers this profound, almost paradoxical liberation if you can accept this deterministic world. And this is the key takeaway of the whole deep dive.
We control nothing, but influence everything.
That's it. Accepting this means that every action, every small ripple you create matters immensely, even if you're not the sole independent author of it. Your existence is critical to the chain of causality.
So if that's the world we live in, how should we act? The text suggests a strategy from evolution, the trade-off between explore versus exploit.
Okay, exploiting is the optimization strategy, racing toward a known destination.
And exploring is the randomized strategy, wandering toward the unknown, diversifying, embracing novelty. Evolution shows the power of exploration. This is Orwell's second rule. Evolution is cleverer than you are.
Life didn't optimize for a known outcome. It used relentless, randomized exploration, mutation, selection to find ingenious solutions.
We see this in human societies too. The Kantu rice rubber problem in Borneo. Rubber farming is a closed, stable exploit system. Optimization works. But rice farming is an open, complex rice problem. The environment can change instantly.
And the Kantu people, facing that uncertainty, use effectively random methods. They interpret divine signs from sacred birds to decide where and when to plant their rice.
And researchers found that this randomized exploratory strategy resulted in significantly less overall crop failure than neighboring communities that tried to over-optimize based on past results. In an uncertain world, Diversifying through randomization is often superior.
Which means we have to actively cultivate idleness and diversion.
We have to. To maximize our long-term influence, we have to embrace uncertainty and allow for undirected contemplation. But our culture hates it. Remember that shocking study where people chose to give themselves painful electric shocks rather than sit alone with their thoughts for 6 to 11 minutes?
We will do anything to avoid quiet reflection, yet that's where the breakthroughs happen.
Always. Galileo's pendulum discovery came from watching a chandelier swing in church. Einstein's insights came while playing the violin. The Wright brothers imagined flight while watching buzzards on a picnic.
These moments of idleness, of exploration, are where our influence really emerges. By letting go of the pursuit of control, we liberate ourselves and our best ideas.
And we allow ourselves to become part of that chaotic, beautiful chain of flukes.
What an incredible journey this has been. From the Mohicans surviving a tsunami because of a story to the U.S. Senate being controlled by an ancient coastline, we've really covered the radical interconnectedness of it all.
We have. And I think we've established that the world is defined by contingent flukes, not fixed trajectories. Our real power lies not in control, but in understanding that our influence is constant. We have to embrace the complexity rather than retreating into the comforting lie of simple answers.
And to leave you with one final thought, something that just underscores the absolute, irreducible arbitrariness of it all. Let's look at a modern geopolitical flashpoint, the rebuilding of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. For some Orthodox Jewish groups, this is tied to the return of the Messiah.
And it requires a ritual purification using the ashes of a perfectly red heifer, without a single blemish. And starting that ceremony would almost certainly provoke a massive regional conflict.
In 1997, they found a near-perfect candidate, a cow named Melody. She was 99.8% red. The plan was set to proceed. A global religious conflict, maybe World War III, was averted because at the final inspection, a single tiny splotch of white hair appeared on the tip of her tail.
A single hair. A contingent fluke stopped history dead in its tracks.
And to make the fluke even more profound, some scholars suggest the ancient Hebrew word for the required color was mistranslated all along. They should have been looking for a yellow or brown heifer.
The whole saga.
Yeah.
Back to a tiny spot of white hair and a possible linguistic error.
That is the depth of contingency we live within, and it's why every tiny action, every small detail really does matter. Thank you for diving deep into the material with us. Thank you for watching. Tab, please like, share, subscribe, follow up in next video.